death, it can be a beautiful experience. No one's getting out of this.
No.
You know, and that's how I would want my family around me, my friends around me, like joy. And that's what we hope to have for our patients and their families.
Welcome to Better Together podcast, produced and directed by our Hospice of South Central Indiana. We're a not-for-profit organization dedicated to making every single moment count. We will share true stories about hospice, palliative, and personal care services that we provide in 22 counties all over South Central Indiana. I'm your host and president, Steph Cain. In the studio with me today, I have Brittany Meyer and Jen Bitner with a new last name. Brittany Meyer, a certified hospice and palliative nurse with 18 years of nursing experience and has been part of our hospice since 2021. After spending a decade of her career with the Department of Mental Health, really a defining hospice moment led her focus to end-of-life care. Over the past 8 years, Brittany served in several hospice roles, including she's been a case manager, hospital rounding nurse, patient care manager, and our new hospice quality specialist. Brittany lives in Batesville with her husband and youngest daughter, Evelyn. Her oldest, Olivia, is in Birmingham, and she's a CPA. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we have Jen Bitner, our birthday girl and newlywed.
Thank you.
And Jen is an intern with our hospice. You've been part of our team over 2 years while completing your graduate program. Before joining hospice, Jen worked as a shelter case manager with Turning Point and also supported refugees from Afghanistan, Allies Welcome at Camp Atterbury. Is that right? Jen's work focused on helping people navigate difficult moments with compassion and practical support. We are going to have a great talk today, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Britt, why don't you start us off? We're going to talk about what happens at end of life. And really, when someone is approaching end of life, what are some of the first changes that their support system, maybe their family, notices?
Well, I think the most obvious or the most noticeable changes are probably going to be an increase in sleeping. Their loved one's probably going to have a decreased appetite, and then they're going to become more socially withdrawn.
And, from the eyes of a social worker, what do you notice the support system in the family? How maybe their behaviors is there more anxiety? Is there less anxiety? Or how does that change?
I think a lot of it has to do with how prepared they might be to this. And that can be a lot of the support that comes from physicians that are walking them to our door, essentially. And then the welcome that we have with hospice, they will have some anxiety about what does this look like. A lot of people have the misconception that hospice means, okay, that's it, goodbye. And really, we build the relationship with the patient and the family to try to ease that anxiety.
Britt, from a nursing perspective, you were sharing some of the physical signs and symptoms that happen to the patient, at end of life, and when they're sleeping more, and some of these changes, the family's not used to seeing that. Could you share a little bit of the education that maybe the frontline nurse would provide to prepare them?
Well, as the body and mind sort of gradually shut down, responses to stimuli are going to change. The nurses will educate that the patient may become more lethargic. They're going to be slower to awaken. They may have little to no appetite, like I mentioned, even with their favorite foods and drink. A lot of times at the end, the patients are not going to remember their children, and they're not going to be able to recall grandchildren's name, and they may not even recognize family members sometimes.
So this is a big one. Eating and drinking often shift. In other words, there's not an appetite. And sometimes when I'm, out and about rounding here in our inpatient facility, families will stop and say, hey, mom or dad or whomever is here isn't eating. Do we need to worry about it? And that's a hard one, right? Emotionally to handle. When you're not eating and drinking, you don't have an appetite, that really scares the loved ones, right?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone has felt hunger. We've all felt thirsty. We know those sensations. We know what it feels like. It's scary to think that your loved one may be experiencing those symptoms and not able to tell you. One of the things that happens when a patient is approaching the end of life is their normal body functions slow way down. We're talking metabolism goes to almost nothing, your GI movements, all those things are going to really slow down.
For our family, and I'm, one of my mentors used to tell families this, and I've picked that up, that if you were sick, or if you were injured, I, as your family member, would make sure you had chicken noodle soup, would make sure you had something to drink. Like I'd stir the bubbles out of your Sprite, all of those things, because that's how I get you healthy. And myself as a caregiver, I want that for you. And I want to do my role. But then when someone is on hospice services and they don't have that need because of the metabolism and because the body knows how to shut down, it can leave the family feeling very distraught. And then again, having that education part of it as to what the nurses come in and talk to the families about and what the social worker can explain on the emotional side can really ease that, again, anxiety about the end of life for that loved one.
Many families worry about if their loved ones are comfortable. What are some of the signs that you look for if someone is at peace or if they're in distress?
From a clinical side or a nursing side, some obvious signs of discomfort that we particularly educate on, if you see moaning or crying or increased movements, whether those are purposeful or not, they may appear restless or they may be reaching out for someone or something that you don't see. But at the end of the day, really, a comfortable patient for us appears to be sleeping.
Can I ask you about something you said? If they are reaching out or maybe they recognize someone, do we see that a fair amount?
We do. The reaching out is not necessarily a phenomenon, but it's pretty much every patient when they get to the end of life.
They see someone they recognize.
I think they see someone.
Yeah.
Or they hear someone, or they see something that they're reaching for.
And so, and on the social work side, like, that can be kind of disturbing to a family, maybe. Like, oh my gosh, like they're hallucinating. Because I come in and I say, are they hallucinating? And again, making sure that the family members know, like, that's okay. It's not uncommon. They might call out for someone who has passed long ago and just say, it's all right, they're here with you. And I had one family member very concerned about lying to their loved one. Like, well, they've been gone. They've died a long time ago. And I said, that's okay. They're allowed to reach out to that person because right now in those moments, that's their reality and they're going to see them. And maybe they're seeing them right now. And that's part of the death and dying process. But again, on the like emotional side, watching someone do that, knowing that they're closer to passing, that's one of the reasons why it's so important that for social work, there is a social worker on call 24/7, because if that family member is, experiencing some scary moments, that they can talk to somebody who knows what they're going through and validate that.
Another thing that sometimes stresses or causes the family member, the caregiver, to have increased stress is the not waking up.
Yes.
A lot of times the families will say, is this normal? She hasn't woken up at all today. And I would always say it's completely plausible that your loved one will sleep 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And will only wake up if you touch them or if you're performing, some personal care on them.
And a lot of times families then get like, well, I don't want mom to just be asleep the whole time. Like, I want her to interact. We've got her friends from high school coming. We've got the grandkids. And in those times, I think you can be respectful in the fact that a body knows how to die. A body knows how to shut down. Yes. You can still visit, have grandkids, have visitors, and have that dying experience happen at the same time.
Yeah, the last two senses to go are going to be hearing and touch.
Yes.
So just being there and talking is enough of a presence, I think, to calm and comfort.
It's cultural here that when someone passes or someone is, dying, that people bring food.
Yes.
Let's make a meal. We're on the meal train. There's a meal train, right? And that's part of our culture. And so food is part of that connection, bringing people together. Let's break bread, let's share some stories. Let's do that. And so while the family and loved ones can do that, it doesn't necessarily mean the person on hospice would be part of that. They would just be part of the story. Can you tell us a story about maybe an experience you had with a patient or family during this transition?
Yeah, so I had met with a family that, talking about the food and all of this, mom used to love Arby's, and the daughter was doing her part in her mind of like, I'm going to get mom a roast beef and I'm going to get her curly fries, and because that's what she loved, and that's, and she brought it to her bedside as mom was in the process of actively passing. And like the social worker, that role is much more, support the family member than the patient in those moments. And, reinforcing that this is a beautiful gift that you've given. I see in your heart what you need. Let's talk. How about you, Britt?
Yeah, actually I have another one. The food is such a big thing, food and fluids. So I had a patient who had been diagnosed with upper GI cancer. Stomach was gone. She had a tube in her stomach that was hooked up to suction. So everything that she put into her mouth went into her belly and it was removed. Right? Because there's nowhere for it to go.
That's
Again, there's just nowhere for it to go. She had 3 daughters and a son. And they were a big, happy family. They loved entertaining and having parties and really being very social. And I had been the case manager for this patient for about a month or so. We were getting close to the end, and I knew we were getting closer to the end. The patient herself, one afternoon, I'd gotten there and talking to her, and she's like, I need you to tell my family this. I need you to tell them really where I'm at. I said, okay. We went and sat at the table with her kids, and I explained to them very gently but very directly, Mom's getting really, really close, y'all.
Right.
So I went back into the room and I was like, is there anything that I can do for you? Is there anything that you want? And she looked at me and she said, can I have one more drink? And I was like, well, yeah, sure. Because again, whatever she's putting in, we have a tube that's bringing it out. So it's not causing her any discomfort. And I was like, well, sure. What do you want to drink? She looked at me and she's like, can I have a glass of wine?
Was it? Yeah.
I said, sure, you can have literally whatever you want. And she said, okay, that's what I want at the end of my life. She's like, I want to have one more drink with my kids. And I said, all right, that's fair enough. And I, went to the kitchen. I was like, hey, Mom wants a glass of wine. And the kids were like, give me the, oh my God, what? And I was like, yeah, she just wants a glass of wine. And, well, they happened to not have any wine in the house. So I had to go in there and tell the patient, I'm sorry, we don't have any wine. She's like, I've changed my mind. I said, all right, well, what do you want instead? She's like, I really want a Stella Artois, like the beer, right?
All right. Did they have it?
I said, okay, we can get this. They did not have it at the house. So I said, let me run up the store and grab a 6-pack. We're going to do this today, And then she ended up passing that night. And the kids woke up and she had passed on that evening after having her last beer.
And that's something that will stick with the family. So that way they go to the store and they see Stella. And it's yes. And that's the other part, that the after someone passes, there will be those food memories that are, ubiquitous to what that patient loved. I was just with a family, the loved one had passed. We were having this conversation about like grief will hit you in very strange ways. Some days you might be at the grocery store, and that led to a conversation about like, oh, chocolate lava cake, and oh, Dad loved this, and it was just so wonderful. And somebody brought up another food memory, and I was like, don't forget those types of things.
Yeah. So when families feel unsure about what to do in the final days, these are stories about how we guide them to simply being present. Are there other things you can share, how we guide them to simply being present?
So I think on that note, a lot of times when I meet with a family, there might be a lot of individuals around the bedside of someone, and it might be very quiet. Not many people, because our culture doesn't really talk very much about death and dying. There's that whole thought of, I don't know what to say. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I don't know how to be. I don't know how to sit. I don't know how to act.
Yeah.
And in those moments, you just need to exist for that person. And if that means that they play their favorite music, if that means that you talk about, the time where, so-and-so wrecked his tricycle into the side of the car and Dad got so mad. And yes, the stories, it does not have to be a death watch, so to speak. It can be a joyful event where you're
celebrating life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember being a case manager, and my biggest thing was when you walk into a room, they all have that solemn look, and they're sort of hanging over the bed and just staring.
Yeah.
It's okay to laugh. Like you said, like, we're not used to death, and death is scary. Loss hurts, but it's okay to laugh. Your loved one lived what I'm hoping is a great life, and it should be celebrated, especially at the end. I would always tell their families, it's okay to tell jokes.
Yeah.
Like, tell your dad that last dirty joke. The one that used to make you laugh. Or confess to your mom, like, yeah, Mom, I did take that $20 out of your purse to go buy cigarettes or whatever it was when I was 13. Like, it's okay to say those things, and it's okay to say them in front of your family, because, again, those memories, you can look back and think, oh, I remember. Instead of remembering, the last breath Dad took, or perhaps there was a little bit of a struggle at the end. Instead, you're going to remember that dirty joke. You're going to remember, me confessing to Mom. You're going to remember the tricycle story.
Yeah.
And you can look back on your loved one's passing from a completely different side, I guess.
Yes.
It's sad and it is going to hurt, but you should be able to rejoice knowing that your loved one's no longer hurting, they're no longer suffering, they're very at peace, and because you were there at the end, you made it that way for them. Just being there, holding a hand. The music is one that just has blown me away throughout my career. Is those songs. You could have it playing very low in the background and you'll see Grandma's hand kind of start tapping. I've seen it. I've seen moments of clarity, like a song will come on and a complete eyes open. They will recall what they were doing the last time they heard that song, or maybe it reminds, the patient of something that happened, and they'll be able to recall it, and it's short-lived, but you know that something's in there. Give them a little happy juice, I guess.
And death can be a beautiful experience. No one's getting out of this.
No.
And that's how I would want my family around me, my friends around me, like joy. And that's what we hope to have for our patients and their families, is that we can help facilitate that in a way that is natural and just wonderful.
I also want to bring up the sacred moments also with our chaplain. Our chaplain will share with me sometimes the family really does want these very solemn and special scriptures to be read, and just that tremendous honoring and respect and dignity in the final hours and days and moments. So they help facilitate those things, and sometimes the stories that will come forward with the chaplain and the patient, even at final hours, the family has never heard. And what a gift those stories can be to them.
I think it's just an absolute honor and privilege to do this job, to walk with the families through this part of life. Sometimes we meet with people that like those stories or like those experiences. Even their closest friends do not have the privilege to be in those moments. And here we are pretty much strangers walking into the home to guide. And it's something that I would never, ever take for granted and always hold dear and special.
I agree with Jen. It's an absolute honor. Every little part of hospice is so very important. There's so many different things, and it's so, like Jen said, like it's just a privilege to be there. At the end, the family trusts you. The family trusts your team. It's a very vulnerable time. Emotions are going to be high. Everything is there, and they're going to look to you. They're going to really ask you and look at you and want to know, like, what am I supposed to do? How do I do this? Or, even Jenna said, they'll say, I can't do this. And so we're there to help them and let them know, no, you can. We're here with you. Yeah, we're here with you. Yeah. You can do this.
This is Better Together, a podcast dedicated to making every moment count. Thank you for listening. Please like us and share on your social media channels. If you have a question or would like to learn more about a specific topic, you can find us at ourhospice.org or call 812-314-8083. Until next time, remember, life is short. We are better together, making every single moment count.